Well, Rich, it's great to connect today. It's an honor for me to be speaking with you. You've lived a life that few people can possibly appreciate or really even imagine. And as you think back on the things you've learned, what lessons would you most like to pass on to others?
Yeah, well, thanks, Nate, for thanks for having me and giving me the opportunity. I think as a young officer going into the Navy and proceeding through a kind of a career of always being an officer, so always being in charge of something. One of the very distinctive lessons that I picked up was that being in charge and being a leader are two separate things. One is a position and one is a behavior. And when it comes to leadership, we don't get to self-designate. In other words, we don't get to call ourselves leaders. That's like calling yourself good looking or funny. All right. Other people decide whether or not you are someone they want to follow, and they do so based on the way you behave. So these leadership behaviors are very elemental. The way we behave towards others allows someone to make the choice as to whether or not we are someone they look at as a leader, someone they'll follow. I always say, if you call yourself a leader and you look back and there's no one following you, I got bad news for you, right? You're
Yeah.
not leading anything. And so as I think one of the keys that I learned about leadership is it's the way we behave. I was always in charge of something in the Navy, but whether or not I was a leader depended on how I was behaving and what the people in my span of care thought of me. And I've had several people come back and say they enjoyed serving with me and serving with me as their leader. But I know that there are people who didn't think of me that way. I mean, they probably wouldn't come and say anything, but it's all about
Yeah.
how we behave. So behaviors like authenticity, decisiveness, empathy, accountability. These are all behaviors that induce the desire for people, selflessness, the desire for people to say that's someone that I want to follow. And I know in the military I've had experience with this. Like there have been people who outrank me hierarchically, and I look at that person, I say I wouldn't follow that person anywhere. And meanwhile, there's someone over there by the water cooler who has no hierarchical rank whatsoever, and I say I would follow that person to hell and back, and it's because of the way we behave. So I think that one of the most important things we have to understand is if you want to be a leader, you need to behave like one. That's how you be a leader.
Yeah, fantastic. I just started teaching leadership again this semester. Just had my first class on Monday. And one of the first questions I asked the students, just to get them thinking a little bit, is, is managing the same thing as leading? And does having a title make you a leader? And I love your point, which I am actually going to incorporate into my class now. I'm going to say, and we basically come to the same conclusion, but I like your phrasing. Look, one is a position, but the other is behavior.
Yeah, yeah, and I would say, I mean, management, and again, terminology matters, and I know we could define management in different ways, but the way I see it is like you can manage a machine, or you
Yeah.
can't lead a machine, and the difference is people, right? You lead people, you don't manage people, you lead people, and so, I mean, I guess you could be managed, but even supervisor, I always kind of joke like, how many human beings want to be supervised? When was the last time we were supervised? It was probably, I don't know, at an eighth grade dance,
Yeah.
or in the kindergarten classroom, right? Is where
Right.
no one else wants to be supervised, and even those kindergarten kids don't want to be supervised, right? So we lead people, and we manage machines. And the other thing I'll say, just in terms of these behaviors, I think one of the most important behaviors is accountability, and this idea that I own my decisions. I own my decisions. I own the consequences thereof, whether good or bad. And the other thing I learned and now try to tell people is that as a leader, you can always delegate responsibility, but you can never delegate accountability. And this was apparent to me several times. I can just remember one time we were doing some training. I was commanding officer of a Navy SEAL squadron, and we were doing some parachute training. And for this particular training, we would actually throw our boats out of the airplane. They were going to parachute down. We're going to follow them and get into them. And I had the guy who was running that training was a brand new jump master. The jump master is really in charge of the jump and getting everything together, and specifically in charge of when to say go, when to jump out of the airplane, because it has to be the spot has to be on target. And I remember we were doing this. It was middle of the day and over water. And as we did the jump, what happened was the boats went out, and then we were getting ready to go out and meet the boats, but the spot was completely off. So we landed way far away from where we were supposed to. And so when we got back from that, obviously, we can all swim. We all, got ourselves cleaned up and got back. And then the debrief, we went through all the things that went on. But ultimately, the conversation came back to me as the commanding officer, and I said, listen. First of all, if we had gone out there and everything had gone right, we wouldn't have learned anything. But second of all, this is something that I own, right? I delegated the responsibility of that drop to my jump master, right? But the fact that we didn't make the drop, I was still accountable for. And I think this is really important. There are leaders out there. I would say there are people in charge out there who try to delegate both. They try to delegate responsibility, and if something goes wrong, they push it away, they cut ties, they let that person loose, right? That's not what leaders do. Leaders take accountability for that. So you can delegate responsibility, you can never delegate accountability. It was a real poignant lesson for me, and should be for any leader.
Yeah, I love that lesson. It made me think of a couple things. I was talking with a Harvard professor yesterday, Todd Rogers, and his research for the last 20 years has focused on how to write in a way that people will actually read it. And one of his lessons is, so you got to do all these things, like make it easy on the reader and be brief. And the approach he takes is, look, if somebody doesn't read what you wrote, it's your fault. You can have the most beautifully written email that has all of the detail and all of the information, but if you can't communicate to them, if they don't read it, if they don't want to read it, if they're not motivated to read it, it's your fault. Yeah. And it's just interesting to me that I love that mindset. We're talking two totally different fields. We're talking about, in the military and jumping out of an airplane, and we're talking about whether or not somebody reads your email. But I love that mindset of, look, I got to own the outcome.
Yeah.
And it just makes me think of the phrase extreme ownership, right?
Yeah. And honestly, Jocko's a friend, and we've talked about that. In fact, Jocko and I joke, he actually, if he said if he could do it again, he'd take extreme out of that, because extreme in any case is usually bad. But ultimately, the lesson is, we own this stuff. And one of the things that accountability also allows us to do as leaders, it allows us to take control. As soon as we point the finger and place blame, we cede control of an environment, of a situation, right? And I remember distinctly there were times where something would happen, and I technically had no responsibility in what happened, but I made a decision to own it, because by owning it, I could take control of it. I could actually shape an outcome. So accountability also allows us to put ourselves in the driver's seat rather than blame, which immediately cedes our position to the back, and we're giving someone else control. So it really operates in two very distinct ways. You are taking ownership of what's going on in order to understand it and really take your own blame. But you're also taking control of it, so you can actually shape and learn from it in a positive way. So it's really powerful.
Yeah, really interesting. I hadn't quite thought of it like that. I'm really interested in sports psychology, and I know in the military you probably talk a lot about, you have to worry about the things you can control, and you can't worry about things you can't control. But we want to expand the number of things we can control. And as soon as we start pushing blame on somebody else, it's like we're giving up the ability to control things. The point of control the things you can control and don't worry about the things you can't control isn't to give up as much control as possible. It's just to help you find the right balance. But ideally, we can control. I hate being out of control in my life. I want to control as much as possible.
Yeah, most people do, and everybody looks at it in a leader. I mean, when people look at leaders or decide or choose leaders, it's because that person is competent and capable of taking control. And I think it's so. One last thing, because people have asked me before, are leaders born or are they made? And my answer to that is neither. They are chosen. They are chosen by the way we behave. And so these behaviors, whether it be accountability, authenticity, selflessness, empathy, humility, all these behaviors are what embody and allow someone to choose you as a leader, should you behave that way.
I love that approach as well, because in my leadership class, we spend the first about 2 or 3 weeks kind of talking about personality traits of leaders. And we talk about this, you know, are leaders born, or they made? And so we talk about, well, here are the correlates of leadership. But ultimately, where we get to in the class is what really matters in leadership is what you do. And I just love the simplicity of your phrasing here. It's not about being born or being made a leader. It's about being a leader. It's what you do that determines whether or not you're a leader. And then depending on how you behave, people will either follow you or not.
Yeah, 100%.
Well, Rich, I could listen to you for hours. I know you have so much incredible hard-earned wisdom. But that makes these lessons all the more valuable to me, that this is what you chose to share. Really appreciate your time. Wish you all the best, and I look forward to our paths crossing again in the future.
Thank you, Nate. Pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.